Hi, I'm Micah Clark. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to talk about election results. I did not mention this in my weekly email on Wednesday. I had more policy things, didn't want to stay up till 1 in the morning looking at all the election results. And also, sometimes it's good to wait a few days to hear what's going on across the country in various elections. And so today we're going to be talking about what happened on Tuesday. So Jeff, I know there's a lot of news out about this, and some of our audience may be tired of hearing about the election. But this was for Indiana municipal elections. We'll talk about other states and other areas, but this was only for city elections. I didn't see anything unpredictable. Did you see any surprises?
No, and a lot of the coverage seemed to kind of be about the big issues in other states, but it was kind of a mixed bag, don't you think? I mean, Indianapolis kind of went the way we had thought and talked about when we were together last time. But then there were some real surprises, like I was telling you about. A friend of mine called me, our mutual friend Wayne Siebold, who was sitting here with you, was telling me about the unbelievable election in Marion, where they have their first black mayor, who is a Republican and a conservative, and was endorsed by our friend Jim Banks. And they won the entire city council, went from a one-seat majority to actually having every single council seat. It was kind of a weird situation, but it kind of shows you how this election kind of played out. There wasn't really anything I didn't think you could really take away. There was a lot of local issues that drove voters to the polls. But it was what were you seeing and hearing from people?
Well, I was watching Fort Wayne as well as Indianapolis. Fort Wayne, I expected the Democrat incumbent Tom Henry to win, although he had some issues with the DUI. He's been there a long time. He's kind of had the benefit of having a Republican council, but the Republicans picked up a seat there, and so they went from a 5-4 to a 6-3 majority. I was watching Rush Yale, who's a friend, and he had a fairly strong challenge, but won by about 6 points. And so, and of course, like you said, Indianapolis, because of the demographics, a 60-40 win for Mayor Hogsett. What is a little surprising to me, and it's the big conundrum of all of these elections, really, in so many places, is in this case you have a mayor who's been mayor for 8 years. The trajectory of Indianapolis is going down. Crime is up. People are leaving. Businesses are having problems. The state of the city is not as good as it was 8 years ago, and yet people voted for more of it. Now, the Republican candidate was not the best candidate. He was well funded. He could get his message out. But his message too often, I think, was too much like Joe Hogsett's, and you and I know Joe Hogsett from years ago. He's a pretty good candidate back then. This time, I don't think he ran his best campaign, but he had a lot of problems with crime and other things. But he performed basically the way the demographics broke down, which is a 60% Democrat city, and that's about the vote total he got as well.
Yeah, and again, going back to the situation in the city of Marion, Marion is experiencing some of the similar things, crime-wise, economic-wise, that Indianapolis is, yet they basically overturned the whole thing, the voters up there.
Well, what's shocking about that is the Democrat Party in Indiana is really an urban party. It's a city party. We used to have a lot of Democrats in southern Indiana. We don't so much anymore. I mean, there's pockets, but predominantly they are a party of the city. So for Marion, which is not a typically red city, to go that direction is probably a surprise.
I know some people seem to be surprised that Lawrence now has flipped from a Republican to a Democrat mayor. Terre Haute flipped from a Republican to a Democrat mayor. But again, that goes back to what you were just saying. It's an urban party thing. So you're seeing more as people are moving out of the city, who are mostly Republican voters who are looking for a different kind of a life because of the crime issues. It's making the demographics become even more leaning towards the Democrat
And if
side.
I recall, Terre Haute kind of has gone back and forth between Republican and Democrat over the years.
That's true.
And Lawrence is part of Indianapolis, and first African-American mayor in Marion County, which I think is unique, and we'll see how she does and wish her the best. But I didn't see anything major. Of course, the major things that the media focused on were out of state. And of course, I wanted to talk about Ohio real quickly. We've talked about it before. We kind of expected to lose because the pro-abortion side had a very vaguely worded amendment. I think it confused a lot of people. I saw an exit poll that 1/3 of voters in Ohio support abortion without any restrictions, 1/3 oppose abortion, and 1/3 support abortion with restrictions. But what I think happened is that 1/3 don't realize that the issue 1 that was passed allows for abortion right up to birth. It removes all restrictions.
Yes.
Medical inspections, parental rights, partial birth abortion, viability, that's all gone or will be gone soon in Ohio. It happened in Michigan as well. I think the voters were deceived, but also, again, there was $35 million that came in from out of state. The pro-life side was outspent 2-1. And, you know, the Democrats have a dozen George Soros, old uber leftist billionaires.
Yeah.
I don't know if the Republicans have one like that who's committed to funding the way that those guys are.
Yeah.
And so they're always at a bit of a disadvantage, and there is a lot of emotion behind abortion. I thought there were some very good ads there expressing the concerns about parental rights, even on transgender surgeries, which is Planned Parenthood's second biggest source of income now. But it's such a shame, especially for us in Indiana, because we now have Illinois, Michigan, and Ohio that are abortion sanctuaries, if you will, unrestricted abortion, which undermines our law that we passed that prevents abortion except rape, incest, and life of the mother. But thank God we did that in the legislature. Thank God we're not a referendum state.
Yeah, and I think this is a good point, is, you know, we're fortunate. Everybody thinks a referendum state is a good thing. But more times than not, you find that referendum states, they put the referendum on a election year when there's not a lot of people there, and things get passed that really maybe a lot of people weren't paying attention or understand, and it just is to me. We are a republic. We basically elect representatives to be our voice on these issues, and there was a reason why the founders didn't do a pure democracy.
Yes. And I was going to get into that. The president and the Democrats a lot talk about democracy. The media talks about democracy. We are not a democracy. We're a republic. And our founders studied republics, democracies, other forms of government. They did not want a democracy. In fact, there's a quote from Fisher Ames, who was a lesser-known founding father, but he was in Congress for 8 years, the first Congress. He actually authored the First Amendment in the House. He wrote the draft of that. He went to Harvard at the age of 12, like so many of our founders, and was offered the presidency at 50, but his health was in decline. But he made a comment. He said, "A democracy is a volcano which conceals the fiery materials of its own destruction. These will produce an eruption and carry desolation in their way." What they saw, particularly if you remember, when he was in Congress, was during the 10-year period of the French Revolution, which was anarchy. And they were worried about mob rule, because mob rule tends to eliminate the rights of those who can't speak for themselves. And that's what happened in Ohio. And so I'm very much against direct democracy. It sounds like a good idea, but it is so emotional. And if you think about how our founders put into place how we pass laws, how we have checks and balances, they wanted this to be a slow process, a deliberative process. And basically, in one day, Ohio wiped out years of a law that were passed to protect women, to help children, and it was based on emotion. And I just don't think that's healthy for us.
Well, another thing is, like you said, now that it's an amendment, the only way to change it is
another referendum.
Amendment. Whereas if you pass a law, if there are unintended consequences, or you find that people change their mind about the law can be changed on a more, in totality. It can be changed in totality, but it can also be changed in ways that actually correct the problems without upsetting the apple cart, so to speak. And but there was another, going back to Ohio, there was another referendum that pretty much I had no idea that was actually on it, to be honest, until I saw the results of it. But it may be even as disturbing for citizens of Indiana as the abortion plan. Talk a little bit about that.
That was issue 2, and that legalized recreational marijuana, which is also not good for youth. It's not good for highway safety. It's not good for mental health. It's not good for addiction issues. And that mirrored almost identical the same vote as the abortion issue. And so people probably thought this is a way to make tax money. I am so against giving the government more money at this stage. Government's so big, I don't care how you do it. It's never good to give the government more money. And that might be part of the reason. It could also be our lack of morality or thought about the consequences. And Jeff, every session in Indiana, people don't know this, after the session concludes, about 2 weeks to 3 weeks, sometimes a month later, they come back for a day called Technical Corrections Day. And sometimes they'll come back and do this in November too, when they have Organization Day. But even through the long deliberative process of making laws in Indiana, which takes months, and you have committee hearings, you have debate, you have amendments, legislators look at these things, they run them through legislative services, the attorneys. Often they still have to come back and make corrections to laws. You pass a referendum, you can't do that for a technical reason or for a problem. You have to go back to the ballot again. And that's a massive expenditure. And it's hard to understand if you have to make some type of correction. One of the questions I have about Ohio, and I don't know the answer to this, is if a 28-year-old man takes a 14-year-old girl to get an abortion, first of all, is that statutory rape? Is he her pimp? Is he her rapist? Is he her teacher? We don't know who he is. The parents don't know. But let's say it is a situation where a human trafficker or an adult male commits a sexual crime with a minor. Are the restrictions we have on reporting requiring underage abortions to be reported because of those issues, statutory rape, trafficking, are those wiped away as well? Because this is now a constitutional right. And as I read the amendment, as I've read some legal reviews, it wipes out almost every restriction. And see, the abortion industry has always fought against any Department of Health regulations. They say they can regulate themselves, which we don't allow for tattoo parlors or veterinary clinics. And they often report poorly. We tend to think that sometimes they hide these things. There have been various pregnancy termination reports that have been brought up to the Medical Licensing Board when they find discrepancies. Will that happen in Ohio? And could we be in a situation in Ohio where abortion clinics are hiding crimes because there's no restrictions on them now?
And it goes right back to what we were talking about, being a republic and not being a democracy. There's a reason why we have a Republican form of government, because we can address, we don't necessarily have to change the entire law to address issues that have arisen from the law, intended or unintended. And if we're not, one of the arguments that we've heard for 30 some years in doing this is that the other side wants safe, legal, and safe abortions. Yet, as you're describing here, there's the potential that they could be unsafe.
Unregulated, uninspected. If you have a doctor like we had in Pennsylvania who had unborn babies in his freezer, and one in Illinois who practiced in Indiana had all those fetuses in his garage, bad medical conditions. This puts women at harm. Of course, it puts all children who go into the abortion clinic at harm for death.
And then it also, we go back to years ago when it's been actually a while now, where we saw the videos that uncovered the fact that they were selling
body parts.
Yes. If you don't have any regulations and you have no accountability, what's to stop that from happening? What's to stop, the harvesting of human parts from continuing? And if the legal arm feels like they can't come in at all under any circumstances, a lot of times crimes are, we've talked about this, crimes of all types are uncovered under investigation for another issue.
And they're going to have to fight that within this new blanket amendment. And it'll be interesting because the left loves to say the Second Amendment is not a universal right; it can be regulated. I don't think they're going to say that about abortion, because they have never said that before. They said just the opposite. But we'll see what the courts do and how Ohio deals with this. But it's very tragic, and we need to pray for Ohio. Ohio really needs their best line of defense now, and it's not offensive, it's defensive, and that's crisis pregnancy centers. They need more of those. Churches need to preach on this issue, because they're going to have to convince the culture, because the law is not going to back life anymore.
and be there ready to help the victims because they're going to be victims.
Yes.
We just know. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, the tax issue you were talking about with marijuana. We know now because we've actually had states who have legalized it. We know that the things that we're concerned about actually have occurred.
Yeah, the social cost. The black market's still there.
The black market's even larger.
Even larger, yeah.
The unintended consequences of wealthy communities having drug dealers in them who are turning their mansions into marijuana growing farms within the house because they feel like they're safe in a safe gated community and they don't have to worry about the police. You know, I had a friend who I was asking him about, I remember years ago when they legalized marijuana in California, and he said, "Oh, nobody buys the legal stuff because, you know, you can buy the illegal stuff nobody knows,
right?
And it's cheaper. It's not taxed, so it's cheaper.
Yeah.
So you know, all of those things that they said wouldn't happen, the tax dollars coming in doesn't happen at the level.
Crime is still
the crime is still a problem, if sometimes even worse, and we just know that when you legalize it, there's all kinds of other issues. Plus the new potency of the marijuana has very, very dramatic effects on especially young people, but also people in general.
Yeah. Another race got a lot of attention that surprised me a little bit was the Kentucky race between Governor Beshear and Daniel Cameron, the Attorney General, who seemed like an up-and-coming star. It's interesting in that state, for all the proclamations of a Democrat win, is that every Republican office holder statewide won with 65% of the vote. And Cameron was down by 10 points a week or two ago. He lost by 5. I think Beshear is a big name. He also was perceived as doing a very good job during tornadoes that went through. And so there's a lot of local reasons. I don't know how well each campaign did, but that was a bit of a surprise. There was a lot of vote splitting there. You know, they're talking about Cameron being a national figure now, a possible presidential candidate sometime because the Democrats don't have a lot of a bench. But the problem for the Democrats, I think, is that when they become a national candidate, their party moves them so far to the left. We saw that with Evan Bayh when he tried to run. You know, the only way he could win, and Frank Oban too, was to be a conservative Democrat. They don't allow that anymore. And he will have to take positions on very controversial issues, and he'll have to go to the left to get the party's nomination if he ever runs. He probably won't be the same same Governor Beshear that the Kentuckians know. Yeah. So, and then it's interesting. We saw a few other things come up, and you see these stories a few days after the election. You know, the first news, the media always wants to say the Democrats did so well, the Republicans did so poor, then they run these stories about other Republican parties dying, falling apart. And we've been through that before. You know, the Republicans sometimes are their own worst enemies. Democrats are extremely good at politics. But we've also seen now stories coming out, well, wait a minute, the Republicans picked up seats in Long Island, New York, for the first time in 20 years. They picked up a local council seat in AOC, Cortez's district, which is ultra-liberal. And I think there's some things going on, particularly maybe with crime, in some of these cities that have been run by Democrats for decades. And so you're seeing some shifts in the demographics, some shifts in voting patterns that I think are always healthy and interesting.
Yeah, it was definitely not a clean election.
Yeah. So, of course, so much of the attention is next year because it's going to be such a massive election. In Indiana, we'll have U.S. Senate, governor, president, every House member in the state House, half the Senate, every congressional district will be up for election.
A lot of open seats. We usually only have 1 or 2.
Right, and a lot of competitive races. There's going to be a ton of money. Y'all are going to be so sick of the election by the time March rolls around. And we already have candidates running ads now before they can even file to run yet for U.S. Senate and other races. So your mailboxes are going to be full. We will have, again, we'll be working with the iVoter Guide with the Indiana Family Institute, doing that as well. 2, make sure you can find an online voting guide on state and federal races to know where candidates stand. So I encourage you, it's not up yet, but iVoterGuide.com, you can go to their site but they are working on voter guides for next year. Again, the filing deadlines haven't occurred, so we don't know who all the candidates are. But we will have voters guides. We did not have them for the city election. You just can't do that with the staff and the costs. But we will have voter guides for you next year. And it's important that you vote your values when you do vote. So.
Absolutely.
Well, Jeff, thank you for joining me today, and thank you for watching. I hope that was helpful. And if you have any questions about any election or any issues that we bring up, please feel free to email us, and we'd love to address that in a future show. But again, I'm Micah Clark, Jeff Howe, Communications Director, and we thank you for watching, and we hope you have a wonderful weekend.